On a quiet farmstead in the Texas Hill Country, the Whitfield family shared their land with a wild and unexpected resident, a bobcat kitten named Chico. The young cat became a constant presence, often roaming the property and watching over the yard with wide amber eyes. But the wild spaces are changing. Expanding suburban development has pushed coyote populations into tighter densities, making them bolder and more territorial. In one sudden moment, a far more dangerous predator emerged, and the fragile balance between safety and survival collapsed. What happened next would test every instinct this family had ever learned, and reveal just how deeply a wild heart can change a human one. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning smelled like cedar and rain-washed earth, the way it always did after a good Texas Hill Country downpour, and Carrie Whitfield stood on the back porch with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, watching the sunlight break through the tree line in long, golden fingers. It was the kind of morning her grandfather, Earl Whitfield, used to call God's apology for yesterday, his way of saying that no matter how rough things got, a new day always came clean. Earl had been gone 3 years now, but in 100 quiet ways, he was still very much present on this property. The old farmstead sat on 42 acres outside Kerrville, Texas, a stretch of cedar breaks and live oak groves that rolled gently toward a limestone creek bed the family had fished since before Carrie's mother was born. It was the kind of land that held memory the way old wood holds warmth, slowly, deeply, and long after the source of that warmth has moved on. Carrie and her husband, Dale, had moved back from San Antonio 6 years ago to help Earl manage the place in his final years, and when he passed, they'd stayed. Their 2 kids, 17-year-old Marcus and 12-year-old Lily, had grown up here, and both had come to love the land in the unself-conscious way children do when they're allowed enough room and silence to actually notice the world around them. And the land gave them plenty to notice. They had white-tailed deer that grazed the back meadow every evening like a congregation. They had wild turkeys that marched single file across the yard with the dignity of small, bad-tempered diplomats. They had ringtails in the woodpile, a great horned owl that roosted in the old water tower, and, most remarkably, they had Chico. Chico had first appeared about 18 months ago, a young bobcat kitten barely the size of a house cat, slipping along the rock fence line at dusk like a small, spotted roomer. Lily had spotted him first and screamed so loudly that Dale dropped his wrench under the truck. But by the time everyone gathered on the porch, the kitten had vanished back into the cedar scrub like smoke. But he came back. They always came back, Carrie would later say, if you gave them reason to feel safe. Over the following weeks, Chico, Lily named him after a stray dog in a book she'd loved in 3rd grade, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, became a regular fixture on the periphery of their lives. Never close enough to touch, never tame enough to approach, but present in the way wild things can be present when they've decided a place is worth their cautious attention. He would sit on the limestone fence post near the old chicken coop, watching the yard with amber eyes as wide and deliberate as a judge's. He'd crouch at the edge of the meadow at dusk, practicing his hunting skills on grasshoppers with a seriousness that Lily found hilarious and Marcus pretended not to find adorable. Carrie had done her research. She called the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department once, early on, worried that a solitary young bobcat might be orphaned or injured. The wildlife officer she spoke with, a woman named Sandra Pruitt out of the Kerrville field office, had told her that juvenile bobcats were often spotted alone as they dispersed from their mother's territory, typically around 10 to 12 months of age. As long as the animal appeared healthy, was hunting on its own and wasn't exhibiting distress behaviors, she said. The best thing the family could do was leave him alone and appreciate the privilege. "You've got good habitat out there," Sandra had told her. "Brush cover, water, prey base. He's probably claimed that stretch of creek as his own. Just enjoy him." They did. More than they expected to. Dale, who had grown up hunting and held a practical, unsentimental view of wildlife, found himself checking the fence post each morning the way another man might check on a neighbor's porch light, just to make sure everything was all right. Marcus started keeping a nature journal, something he would never in a million years have admitted to his friends at school, in which he logged Chico's appearances with rough sketches and timestamps. Lily had taken to leaving a small pile of rocks near the fence post, so she always knew which direction Chico had been sitting based on his tracks in the dry dust around them. And Carrie felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was that caring about this wild, untouchable animal was, in some way she couldn't articulate to anyone, a way of keeping Earl close. Because Earl had loved this land the way you love a living thing. Attentively, protectively, with a habit of preparation he drilled into this family as thoroughly as table manners and the habit of saying thank you. The air horns were Earl's idea. That was simply a fact. He'd started keeping them by the doors, front, back, and the side door off the mudroom, after a neighbor's child was bitten by a coyote in the early 2000s. The neighbor's yard, Earl had explained gravely at the dinner table, was not properly secured, and the family hadn't had anything close at hand when the coyote came into the yard in broad daylight, bold as anything, and went after the little girl's terrier with the child right there. The dog survived. The child was uninjured, though terrified. But Earl had taken the lesson and applied it with the quiet, comprehensive thoroughness that characterized everything he did. "You keep an air horn by every door you go out of," he told Carrie's mother. "You keep one in the barn. You keep one in the truck. They're cheap, they're legal, and they don't require a second thought when something goes wrong." For years, this had been a family joke. Gentle, affectionate, the way families tease each other about the quirks of beloved elders. "Grandpa and his air horns," Marcus would say, rolling his eyes whenever he nearly knocked one off the hook beside the back door. There were 4 of them in total. One by the front entry, one by the back door, one by the mudroom, and one mounted in a metal bracket beside the barn. Earl had tested them annually, replacing them on a rotation so they were never past their pressure date. And he had explained to every member of the family, repeatedly, how to use one. Point away from people and animals, press the button, hold steady. After Earl died, no one removed the air horns. It felt wrong somehow, like erasing something of him. And besides, Carrie reasoned, coyotes hadn't stopped being coyotes just because Earl was gone. If anything, their boldness had increased over recent years, which the county extension agent had explained was due to expanding suburban development pushing coyote populations into pressure cooker density in the remaining wild spaces. They kept the air horns. They replaced them on Earl's schedule. And for 3 years, they remained exactly what they appeared to be. A small, harmless eccentricity inherited from a beloved old man, gathering invisible dust behind the back door. The afternoon it happened was a Thursday in late October, the kind of clear, warm Texas autumn day that felt like summer had left a parting gift. Carrie was in the kitchen doing paperwork at the table, half listening to the radio. Dale was in the barn doing something mechanical and loud. Marcus was at school for a late practice. Lily had gotten off the bus at 3:15 and gone straight to her room to change, and had been outside in the backyard for about 20 minutes, sitting on the limestone wall with a sketch pad, working on a drawing of the old water tower. Carrie heard it before she understood what she was hearing. It started as a sharp, high-pitched sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a cry. The kind of sound that hit the primitive part of the brain before the conscious mind could categorize it. Then it became a thrashing, a rattling of dry brush, and over all of it, cutting through the warm October air, Lily's voice. "Mom! Mom! Oh no! Mom!" Carrie was out the back door before she registered moving. She nearly grabbed the air horn by instinct. Her hand skimmed it on the way past. And then she was on the porch, and what she saw stopped her as completely as a wall. At the far edge of the yard, where the mowed grass gave way to a narrow strip of brush before the rock fence, a coyote had Chico in its jaws. There was no other way to say it, no way to soften what she was looking at. The coyote was a large male, rangy and gray, with the low-slung posture of an animal that knew exactly what it was doing. It had Chico by the midsection, the young bobcat's back end hanging limp, his front legs clawing desperately at the air. And it was angling toward the gap in the fence where the old gate had rotted off its hinges, the one Dale kept meaning to fix, the one that led into the cedar scrub beyond. Chico was fighting. That was the thing that hit Carrie hardest in that fraction of a second. He was fighting with everything he had, twisting and raking with his front claws, his spotted coat bright in the afternoon sun, his small mouth open in a hiss she could see but barely hear over the sound of the blood in her own ears. He was alive. He was terrified. He was running out of time. Lily was standing 10 feet from the scene, frozen in place, her sketch pad dropped in the grass, both hands over her mouth. She'd been close enough to see it happen, close enough to watch the coyote break cover from the brush pile along the fence and seize Chico before either the bobcat or the girl had time to react. "Lily, get back," Carrie heard herself say. Her voice came out level. She had no idea how. She turned back to the door. The air horn was right there. Orange, battered, hanging on its hook exactly where Earl had put it. She grabbed it. She didn't think about it. Her grandfather's voice was somewhere in the back of her head. Point away from people and animals. Press the button. Hold steady. And she turned back toward the yard and she pressed the button. The sound was enormous. There is no other word for it. It was simply enormous. A sound that had no place in the quiet of a Texas backyard. A sound that punched through the warm October air like a fist and hit the world on the other side of it. Carrie held it for a full 3 seconds, pointing the horn above and to the left of the coyote, just as Earl had taught her. Not at the animal, but close enough that the sheer wall of sound had nowhere to go but into its instincts. The coyote dropped Chico and ran. It was that fast. It was that complete. One moment the animal was there, the next it was a gray streak disappearing through the gap in the fence, and then it was gone, and the yard was terrifyingly, overwhelmingly quiet. Lily burst into tears. Carrie was already moving. Chico lay in the grass near the brush pile, and he was alive. She could see that immediately. But he was hurt. He lay on his side, sides heaving, one back leg extended at an angle that looked wrong. He'd stopped fighting, which was either a sign that the immediate crisis was over or a sign that he had nothing left to fight with, and Carrie couldn't tell which. Up close, he looked impossibly small. She'd always seen him at a distance, across the yard or along the fence line, and in her mind, he'd grown into something larger than he was. In reality, he was perhaps 15 pounds, spotted and tawny, his bobbed tail twitching weakly against the grass. "Don't touch him," Carrie said, as much to herself as to Lily, who had come up behind her and was crying in the gulping, hiccuping way of a child who is trying very hard to stop crying but cannot manage it. "We don't touch him. We call for help." Dale came running from the barn. He'd heard the air horn. And when he saw what was in the grass, he went very quiet in the way that men of his type go quiet when something is serious and they are deciding what to do. "I'll get a crate," he said. "We've got the old cat carrier in the tack room." "Call Sandra Pruitt first," Carrie said. She already had her phone out. She got Sandra's voicemail, left a message that was more coherent than she expected to manage, and then called the number Sandra had given her once, months ago, for the nearest permitted wildlife rehabilitator. A woman named Ruth Hollowell, who ran a small wildlife rehab center called Cedar Creek Wildlife Care out of a property near Comfort, about 30 miles south. Ruth answered on the second ring. Ruth Hollowell was 63 years old, compact and efficient, with short gray hair and the kind of calm that comes from decades of handling situations in which panic is a liability. She arrived in a white pickup truck 50 minutes after Carrie's call, and she brought with her a wire transport crate lined with a fleece pad, a pair of thick leather gloves, and a canvas covering cloth that she called a catch cloth, used to drape over a distressed animal and reduce visual stimulation during handling. She did not let the family help with the capture, which was kind but firm. What she did let them do was watch from the porch, which was perhaps a more important concession than it appeared, because what they witnessed in those careful, practiced minutes was something none of them would forget. Ruth moved slowly and without drama, the way someone moves around a frightened animal when they understand fear as a physiological state rather than a character judgment. She spoke in a low, steady voice, not to calm Chico exactly, since a wild bobcat has no framework for human reassurance, but simply to fill the air with sound that was consistent and unthreatening. She observed him carefully before she touched him, checking his breathing rate, the position of his limbs, the responsiveness of his eyes. Then she draped the catch cloth, placed gloved hands with precision, and transferred him to the crate in one smooth, continuous motion. He didn't struggle much. That worried her, she said afterward, more than struggling would have. "He's in shock," she told Carrie, standing at the tailgate of her truck with the crate secured in the bed. "That's normal after a predator attack. The real question is what's going on internally. He took impact to his midsection. I can feel guarding in his respiration, which tells me there may be a rib involved. Possibly more." She paused, and something in her face shifted. Not softer exactly, but more direct. "I won't lie to you. He needs X-rays and a veterinary assessment tonight. What happens from there depends on what we find." Lily, who had composed herself into a kind of trembling stillness, said, "Is he going to die?" Ruth looked at her directly. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But I can tell you that finding him when you did, and calling when you did, gave him the best possible chance he's going to get. You did everything right." The next 4 days were the longest Carrie could remember in recent years. Ruth called the first evening to report that the veterinary assessment, performed by a wildlife vet in Careville who volunteered with Cedar Creek, had confirmed a hairline fracture of one rib and lacerations to the flank and right shoulder, consistent with coyote bite punctures. No internal organ involvement, no spinal injury. The rib, Ruth explained, would heal with restricted movement and time, the same way it would in a human. The puncture wounds would be cleaned, monitored for infection, and treated with a course of antibiotics in his food. He was eating, lightly, cautiously, but eating. "Bobcats are remarkably resilient animals," Ruth told her. "If there's no infection and the rib stabilizes, his prognosis is good." Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since coming home from school that evening to find the yard transformed into a crisis scene, and his little sister, still red-eyed at the dinner table, looked up from his phone. "What does good mean, exactly?" "It means he has a real chance," Carrie said. Marcus nodded and went back to his phone. But she noticed later that he'd opened the nature journal. Ruth sent photos every 2 days. The first set showed Chico in a recovery enclosure, a modified dog kennel with wire mesh sides, elevated slightly off the ground, with a hide box at one end where he spent most of his time. He looked small and still, and not much like the animal who had sat on their fence post with such sovereign disregard for their existence. The second set showed him standing, investigating a piece of PVC pipe that Ruth used as environmental enrichment. The third set showed him eating with visible appetite, crouched over a bowl with the focused, possessive energy of an animal who has decided he intends to continue living. Lily printed the third photo and put it on her bulletin board next to a sketch she'd made of him sitting on the fence post. He was released on a cool November morning, 5 weeks after the attack. Ruth brought him back herself, which Carrie hadn't expected. She'd assumed the release would happen somewhere in the general area, some stretch of cedar scrub that would blend into Chico's existing range. Instead, Ruth pulled up the driveway with him in the transport crate and explained that, given the animal's established familiarity with this specific territory, returning him to the point of origin was the most sound approach from a behavioral standpoint. "He knows this place," Ruth said simply. "His scent markings are here. His hunting routes are here. Introducing him to unfamiliar territory right after a traumatic event and a lengthy captivity would create unnecessary stress. This is his home." Dale had repaired the gap in the fence the week before, a job that had been waiting for 3 years. He hadn't said much about it, just gone out one Saturday with cedar posts and wire and come back inside 2 hours later with sawdust on his shirt. They gathered at a respectful distance, all 4 of them plus Ruth, while Ruth positioned the crate at the edge of the brush line, opened the door, and stepped back. There was a long moment of stillness. The cedar wrens were calling in the scrub. A breeze moved through the live oaks and sent a scatter of yellow leaves across the limestone. Then Chico walked out. He stood at the edge of the crate door for a moment, blinking in the November light, his spotted coat bright against the dead grass. He turned his wide amber eyes across the yard. Across the limestone fence, the barn, the old water tower. And Carrie had the irrational, overwhelming feeling that he was taking attendance, accounting for what was there and what was the same. Then he stepped into the brush and disappeared. Lily made a small sound. Not quite a cry. Something softer than that. "He'll be okay," Ruth said quietly. "How do you know?" Lily asked. "Because he walked out of that crate like he owned the place," Ruth said, and the corner of her mouth turned up. "That's a good sign in a bobcat." 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Lily came in from the backyard with dirt on her knees and her eyes bright. "He's on the fence post," she said. They all went out, even Dale, who was in the middle of something in the garage. They went out quietly and stood on the porch, and there he was. Chico, on the old limestone fence post near the chicken coop, sitting in the sideways late autumn light as though he'd never been anywhere else. His right shoulder, where the worst of the lacerations had been, showed a slight irregularity in the coat. A small patch where the fur grew back a shade lighter, the kind of mark that would probably soften over time but never fully disappear. He regarded them with the amber-eyed calm of an animal that has survived something terrible and emerged from the other side of it into an ordinary afternoon, and found the ordinary afternoon sufficient. Carrie looked at the back door. The air horn hung on its hook, orange and battered, just where Earl had put it. She thought about her grandfather. The way he'd explained his reasoning at the dinner table all those years ago, not with urgency or drama, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had thought carefully about the things he loved and had decided to protect them. He'd hung those horns for a child's terrier and a neighbor's frightened daughter. He couldn't have known they'd one day be reached for in a Texas afternoon on behalf of a spotted wild cat that a family had never intended to love but somehow had. But maybe that was the thing about preparation. Maybe that was exactly the thing. You prepared for what you could foresee, and the grace of it was that the preparation covered what you couldn't. She didn't say any of this out loud. There was no need. Marcus had his phone out, taking photographs. Dale had his hands in his pockets, watching the bobcat with the expression he usually reserved for things he respected deeply. Lily was perfectly still, the way she got when something mattered to her more than she had words for. And Chico sat on the fence post in the November light, his bobbed tail twitching once, slowly, like a period at the end of a long and difficult sentence. The sentence now finished, the meaning finally clear. All is well here. I am still here. I am home.